Sponsored by Taylor Freelance, Rainier Ballistics, Hodgdon Powders, and JPL Precision.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Power Factor. You'll notice we're back here in the garage again, and the reason being is that it is absolutely dumping rain here in the Seattle area, and actually quite a bit of thunder and lightning in the area. It's been an unusually hot and dry summer, so we're all kind of welcoming this, but on the other hand, I don't want to be outside filming in a complete deluge, and then you're going to get flashes of lightning in the background. That'll provide for some interesting effects. So this week's episode is going to be on the National Sporting Clays Association classification system, but I thought before I would get into that discussion, I would kind of like to add a point to the last episode that I did on shooting slumps. It's something I thought about at the very last moment of doing that program. And speaking of lightning, when I filmed that, we were just beginning to experience some lightning in the area, and I thought, well, it'll probably be good to wrap up the filming before I got hit by any. So what I wanted to add is that if you get into a serious rut and you just cannot seem to get out of it, what I would really recommend doing is seeking some training or some instruction from a professional instructor in your area. A lot of times it's simply taking a shooting lesson from somebody who knows what to look for, what to observe, technique and everything can really help out. So if you go to the NSCA website, there is actually a section there where you can find shooting instructors by state and by type. And what I mean by type is there's what's called a level 1, level 2, and level 3 instructor. And a level 1 is basically instructor for beginning shooters. A level 2 is usually for intermediate, and a level 3 is for your more advanced shooters. But I would recommend that you don't hesitate if you're, let's say, an intermediate or somewhat advanced shooter, and if you can't find somebody who's, say, a level 2 or level 3 instructor, don't be afraid to go to somebody who's a level 1, especially if you haven't taken instruction before, because they can more often than not probably find out or recommend or see what you may be doing wrong. The other thing to take into consideration is gun fit. So if you've let's say gained or lost a significant amount of weight in recent history, that could have changed your gun fit, and that may be the reason why your shooting has degraded one way or another. So a lot of times these instructors can also recognize gun fit situations and be able to make recommendations there. So again, if you're having trouble and you just can't, seem to resolve it on your own, and that's the other thing, is that a lot of times a lot of these problems are ones that you just can't self-identify. You can't step back and see what you're doing or recognize what you're doing wrong, and typically an instructor can pick up on that very quickly, make a correction, a simple correction, and get you back in your game. So today we're going to talk about the National Sporting Clays Association classification system. It's interesting. It's very similar actually to USPSA in the fundamental design of the classification system. In NSCA, the top level class is Master, and then from there it goes to AA, A, B, C, D, and E. And then they have what's called Hunter class, and Hunter class is for people who are basically just out playing around, not looking to compete, just out basically to enjoy the shooting course that is set up for the registered shooter, registered tournament, who are out there just to have fun. Don't really care about the system, don't really care about getting classified, and are just there basically very similar to what an unclassed shooter is in USPSA terms. So again, in USPSA, you don't have to be a member of the organization to shoot club matches. Same thing is true in NSCA. You don't need to be a member of the NSCA to go out and shoot registered tournaments. For those people who are doing that in USPSA terms, it's an unclassed shooter. You go out there, you have fun, you shoot the classifier. Your score your score counts for the club match, but it doesn't get turned into USPSA for national classification. The same thing is true in NSCA. Of the Hunter class, they go out there, they shoot, they have fun. They're not part of the classification system, and it basically ends there. One thing I will mention here is that for people who are are going out and shooting as 100 class. If you think you might be kind of interested in kicking the tires, so to speak, the NSCA has something called a Complimentary Limited Membership, or CLM, and it's something that you can participate in at the club. Effectively, what it gives you is 1 full year from January to December, or, well, it should say it's till the end of the calendar year. So if you elect to do this in, say, September, you're kind of losing out in the benefit of the entire program. But what it does is gives you that calendar year to effectively kick the tires and experience the NSCA. So what you end up doing is you start out in E-class, and you will then be shooting for score for the remainder of the year. You actually get the NSCA Sporting Clays magazine on a quarterly basis. The only thing you don't get to do is vote. But if you don't care about that, and most people don't, then you really get a good chance to kind of experience the whole entire NSCA, what it's all about, and actually have your scores entered as if they were, and actually they are entered for score. And if you elect to then become a full-fledged member the next year, everything that you've done for that previous year while you were shooting part of the CLM will roll over. So I would highly recommend that if you are, kind of an aspiring sporting clay shooter and you go out and you're shooting registered tournaments, that you take advantage of the CLM. And the CLM can only be done at the club. So, you go up to your, at the registered shoot, you go up to the person who's basically signing everybody up and tell them that you're interested in the complimentary limited membership. And they should have the information for you to fill out and submit, and you're off on your way. So, it's kind of, it's too bad USPSA doesn't do something similar to this, because I think it would be a really good opportunity for them to get more people into the shooting sports to experience it. And obviously the idea behind these, free 1-year memberships is to, get you hooked. You go out there, you enjoy it, you say, hey, this is a lot of fun, this is something I want to, continue doing. And then you become a full-fledged member the next year. So I think it's really a good way to market the program, so to speak, and get people more interested and involved in doing this. Let's talk about the NSCA system of classification, how it works, and then we'll get into kind of how it doesn't work, or I would say my one complaint about the system. The NSCA system of sporting clays is based on what's called punches, and punches are the way that you advance from one class to another. So we've already talked about the different classes. If you are becoming a member in the NSCA and you are transferring in from one of the other similar shotgun shooting sports, such as skeet, which is NSSA, or trap, the ATA, you will have a classification already in those games. When you transfer into NSCA, if your classification is A or higher in these other sporting shooting events, then you will transfer in at one level lower than your current classification. So as an example, if you're shooting skeet and you are A class, then you will come into NSCA as B class. If you are B class in NSSA, or National Skeet Shooting Association, then you enter in at the bottom at E class. That's just the way it works. Everybody who comes in to NSCA will start as E class, unless you have previous experience or are already a member of one of the other organizations and are shooting A and above. The other exception to that is if you are transferring in from a similar sporting clays organization, then you come in equal to or higher than your current classification. So again, as an example, if you're a member of the Clay Pigeon Shooting Association, which is effectively like the NSCA in Britain, then you come in as your same classification. But generally speaking, most people are going to be coming in as E class for the most part. So you start out at E class. Okay. So the way the system works is based on punches. And punches are awarded based on your performance at registered shoots. That's all it gets down to. So what it requires is that at a registered shoot, there has to be at least 3 people in your classification or in your class before a punch is awarded. So if there are, let's say the minimum, there are 3 people and you are in, say, D class or whatever, and you beat those 2 other people, then you are awarded a single punch. Okay. And after you acquire a certain number of punches for each class, then you move into the next class. So let's talk about that for a minute. So depending on the number of shooters that are participating in your class at a particular registered shoot, a defined number of punches are awarded. So if it is the minimum of 3 shooters, then the person who wins gets 1 punch and there are no other punches awarded. If there are only 2 shooters in your class, then no punches are awarded. Rather than dragging you through all the different or all the different matrix here of the number of punches and who they go to, I'm just going to talk about basically 2 points. The 3, which we've already talked about, 1 punch is awarded to the person who wins that particular class, has the highest score in that class. And I'm going to go to the other extreme, which is if you have 45 plus shooters in a particular class. So what happens there is that 4 punches are awarded to first, second, and third highest scorers and ties. 3 punches are for the 4th highest score and all ties. 2 punches are awarded for the 5th highest score and all ties, and 1 punch is awarded for the 6th highest score and all ties. So as an example, if you are in, again, E class and everybody in E class, or I'm sorry, the 4 highest shooters in E class all shoot a 75, they are all tied for first place. And all 4 of those guys get 4 punches if there was 45 or more shooters. And then they go down to second place. And all the people who are in second place or tied for second place, they also get 4 punches. It goes down to, in this case, third place. So all the people for fourth place will get 3 punches. Hopefully I haven't confused you too much there, but the idea is basically is that it's for high score and ties get the certain number of punches. So in order to progress from one class to another, here are the minimum requirements for that. So to go from E class to D class, it takes 4 punches. In order to go from D class to C class, it takes 6 punches. From C class to B class takes 8 punches. From B class to A class takes 12 punches. From A class to AA class takes 14 punches. And then from AA class to Master, which is the highest level, takes 20 punches. So you can kind of see there, in order to progress higher and higher and higher in classification, you have to have more and more punches to do it. So the other good news is that the punches roll over from one year to the next. So as an example, let's say here in 2015, you are in D class. It takes 6 punches to get into C class. You've got 4 punches. December rolls around. 2016, happens. You've got 4 punches from 2015. Those 4 punches roll over into the next year. And then in the next year, 2016, as soon as you earn 2 more punches, then you immediately advance into C class. But what happens is all your punches from 2014 go away. They disappear, they vaporize. So you're looking at basically in terms of your punches that you have the punches for the current year that you're in and the punches for the previous year that has transpired. So that way it makes it a little bit easier, if you will, to move ahead in class. Again, depending on how many registered shoots you're doing. Now my case, I should say, is that I'm only shooting 1 registered shoot a month. The only shoot that I'm doing is at my home club. And I'd mentioned before that really the only reason I started shooting NSCA registered shooting was not so much for the competition, but basically as a way to personally gauge my progression or my advancement, my improvement, if you will. I wanted to have some sort of a measure to determine whether I was, improving or not improving. So that's really the reason why I joined NSCA and started shooting registered shoots. But if you look at it from that standpoint, is that I'm only shooting once a month. I'm effectively limited in never being able to go, or only being able to go so far. I mean, if you look at it from a realistic standpoint of, from double A to master class takes 20 punches. Well, if I'm only shooting, 12 months a year, I had better win every single shoot in double A for 2 years in a row, and the likelihood of that happening is pretty slim. So you can kind of see that eventually at some point I'm just going to top out. It's just a fact of the way it works. Unless I went out and started shooting a lot more club matches, which again is not my intent. I'm just out here to have fun and really help support our club, and also do more shooting. That's the one nice thing about shooting registered shoots, and we've talked about this before, is that typically for registered shoots, the target difficulty is more than what you would typically see in practice. So you're going to see longer targets, more difficult targets, more complex targets, more interesting stations and everything. And that's really one of the fun things about shooting registered shoots. The one other thing I really like about this system that NSCA has here in terms of using your registered shoot performance as a gauge, and this is something that Rick and I have talked about before in terms of USPSA shooting. USPSA shooting, for the most part, is based on your classifier score. Yes, there are exceptions if you shoot major shoots or say state shoots or regional shoots or area shoots or nationals. They will take your performance in those shoots and consider that as a classifier, and it becomes part of your overall score. But for the most part, for most of us, if you're just shooting club shoots, or I should say, club matches, your classification is really based on the classifiers that you shoot. And classifiers are typically very tightly constrained, because that's why they're classifiers, but they're very tightly constrained. Usually stand and shoot courses where you're not really moving around, or not much movement, not much activity. They don't really gauge how you go and break down and analyze and or execute field courses. But in reality, that's what most of all of our club matches are. They're field courses. So you'll end up with kind of a situation where a person's classification or how they shoot classifier doesn't really represent very well how they may end up shooting club matches. So you can actually end up on either side of this. You can get guys who are really good at classifiers, really fast, really great at stand and shoots, but have really poor, say, field course execution skills. Or you'll get the complete inverse, where you'll have guys who do really well at field courses, but for whatever reason, when it comes to classifiers, and it could be just because of the pressures, it's the classifier, that they usually have some sort of a problem and they don't have very good classifier scores. So NSCA, their mechanism is how you shoot registered shoots. That's what you're using as your gauge for moving forward, which I think is a much more accurate means for really testing a shooter's skill amongst their peers. So we now have identified how you can, how you progress forward. There are other ways you can move forward, and there's also something else where you can move backwards in classification in NSCA. So let's talk about first how you move forward. How you move forward is what we talked about in terms of punches. That is the primary way how most people move forward. There are two other ways that a person can be upclassed, if you will, from their current classification into a higher class. And they're based on what's called known ability. If somebody decides to petition the NSCA and say, I think you need to, and this could be an individual, it could be a club, it could be literally almost anybody. See, I think you really need to look at this person's scores or their ability, say based on their performance in a different shooting sport or whatever, in a clay shooting sport, not USPSA or whatever. But they are performing at a much level higher than their claimed class. Then they may get advanced by the NSCA, and the NSCA has to notify them, and they can petition the bump in classification. But that is one way that somebody can be bumped. The other way is a little more temporary. If a person goes to a major shoot, let's say it's what they call big blasts or regionals, or what I recently petitioned in was the U.S. Western Open, which is also known as Top Gun, and say, hey, I know this guy is not a D-class shooter. He's really a B-class shooter, or at least or more a C-class shooter or whatever. But he's definitely not a B-class shooter. And he goes to the shoot officials for that particular tournament, they can bump somebody temporarily from their correct class to a higher class. And usually it's one class higher. So again, our hypothetical D class shoot will be moved into C class for that particular shoot. If they happen to get any punches at all in C class in that shoot, they are now permanently C class. But if they don't get any punches in that shoot, they revert back down to D class. So that is one of the other ways that somebody can be moved forward from one class to the other. The other way, which is done maybe a little more frequently, is what's called self-declaring. And self-declaring is something that you obviously do on your own. I've actually done it twice now. I'll explain the two scenarios here of why I did it. But what it amounts to is that you, based on your current class, you can declare any class you want up to AA. You can't declare master, you have to earn master. So what you can say is, I'm going to declare, say, A class for this year. And you are placed into A class at that point for all the registered shoots that you shoot for the remainder of that year. If you punch, in other words, as soon as you beat everybody in that particular class at a registered shoot where there are at least 3 shooters and you are awarded a punch, you are instantly declared A class permanently at that point. If you, however, happen to shoot for the remainder of the year in your declared class and you don't achieve or get any punches whatsoever, then you revert back to your original correct class that you started out at. So again, let's say you're D class and you're like, well, I'm going to declare A class for the remainder of this year, and you declare it and you don't get any punches, then at the end of the year, you go back to D class. So to give you my two scenarios that I did, I started out as E class. I had 3 punches in E class, and I needed 1 more punch to go into D class. It was the end of the year last year. I think what I did is I stated a personal goal. In fact, if you go back and look at my episode that I did on goals, I think I stated that I wanted to get into D class for at the end of 2014. So I think it was like December or something like that. And I said, well, it's the end of the year, and I happened to find out that there were not enough E-class shooters. There were only 1, I think, in December. And I said, well, this will be a quick way to move into D-class from E-class. And I declared D-class, and it turns out I ended up winning D-class that particular day. So I immediately then became D-class because not only did I declare it, but I also achieved a punch. And as I mentioned, that immediately makes it official. So I was in D class at the end of the year, and I now had 1 punch in 2014 that would then roll over into 2015. And then in 2015, the first tournament of the year, I ended up getting another punch. And then I continued shooting all the rest of the months and achieved no punches whatsoever, basically based on no fault of my own because there weren't enough other D-class shooters in my class. And that is kind of one of the other problems that you have at certain clubs, in that if they don't have enough, if it's a small club and they don't have big turnouts, then you can run into a lot of these situations where there's only a couple shooters in each class, and you can kind of effectively get stuck there because while you may be shooting well, there's not enough other shooters for you to get awarded a punch and to advance. So at this point I had 2 punches, and I went to the US Western Open. I ended up getting 2 more punches, so I now had a total of 4. I would need effectively 2 more to move into C. And I kind of stated before, and I've actually had some people tell me that based on my shooting performance, I really don't belong in D class, that I really should be in B class, but I really wasn't willing to make the big, huge leap to B. So I kind of said before that no matter what happened to Top Gun, I was either going to get into C class based on punches, or I would self-declare it at the very first shoot after Top Gun, and basically wait until I punched into C class that way. So last weekend, that's exactly what I did. I declared C class, and then there were 4 other shooters in C class, and I ended up winning C class and was awarded my punch, which makes it official. So I'm effectively now officially in C class. The reason for doing this is that at my particular club, there are more shooters in C class and B class and A class than there are in E class and D class. And basically, I looked at this as an opportunity to get into a classification where I have at least a chance of moving forward based on my performance. And really right now, it's like if I don't get punches, it's not because there weren't enough people shooting, it's because I sucked at that particular shoot. So that's the reason why I decided to kind of like accelerate my progress into E classes to get me into a situation where I at least have a chance of getting punches and moving forward and progressing into C or B or A or wherever I end up finally landing. So those are the mechanisms that you can use for moving forward. There is another mechanism that the NSCA has for moving backwards. There is a standard mechanism where, because of a medical condition or whatever, you can make a request to be moved down in class. USPSA has the same scenario, same situation, or feature, if you will, that you can petition the USPSA to be degraded in class. But what the NSCA does is at the end of the year, and they call this the end of year review, they look at everybody's scores, and for those people who have shot at least 300 targets during the year, and their beginning class and their ending class is the same. So they start at, let's say, as D, and they end as D. They look at those people. And if you receive one or fewer punches, that is the criteria. 300 targets, beginning class and ending class is the same, and one or fewer punches in that class, then they will move you back one class. Okay, so first situation is they announce they're doing an end of year review on everybody, and you can opt out of it if you want. So you can say, don't review me for whatever reason. You can do that. The other thing is that if they do revert you back down in class, you can refuse it. So if they revert you down in class and they tell you what your new class is, you can refuse the class and stay in your current class, which they will accept. So those are the two mechanisms for that. Otherwise, you can accept the down class and then work your way back up through the system. And that may work out for some people. It may be for one reason or another they go into things change, or they go into a shooting slump or whatever, and they revert down in class and immediately, because of their shooting skills, end up punching right back up into where they were before. In fact, I know somebody who had this happen to them, and it was almost ironic. They were downgraded in class, and the very next month, in fact, it turned out at Top Gun, they won their class, got 4 punches, and were immediately right back into the fray again. So those are the mechanisms that you can go up and down in class. One other thing I forgot to mention here is that when you advance from one class to the next class, you lose or purge all of your previous punches. So as an example, when I declared C class, and I had 4 punches in D class before declaring C, when I declared C class, and then punched into C, I lost those 4 punches that I previously had in D class. However, because of the fact that I won my class that day, I'm starting out now with 1 punch in C class. Okay, so far so good. Here's my one problem with the system as it stands, and that is that and I've had this happen numerous times, in that you go to a registered shoot, you perform really well, and there weren't enough other shooters in your particular class for you to be awarded a punch. So you get no punches, you're effectively held back. This kind of hurts, if you will, 2 people. The person that it's happening to and everyone below them. Now, in terms of the person it's happening to, like I said before, you can self-declare and go up in class. If you feel that you are in the wrong classification, you can self-declare and go up. But some people just elect to let the system work on its own until they get the number of punches to move forward. And if they aren't getting the punches because of this arbitrary number that the NSCA has put in place, then they're effectively stuck not going any further. The other group of people it affects is everybody below them. So let's look at it from that scenario. Let's say you're at a club where there is a small attendance that comes to that particular club. And let's say in a particular class, it's let's say always 1 or 2 people that are in that particular class. But the situation is that since everybody starts out in E class, You get people who are entering NSCA who are really good shooters that don't belong in E class, but that's where they start at. So they're shooting these just outrageously high scores, and they don't belong in E class, but they're not getting enough punches to move forward. And you put them up against people who are really truly in E class, who are shooting, let's say, maybe 10 or 20 birds less than this particular individual, and they're held back from advancing because this one particular individual can't get out of the class that they're in because they're not getting enough punches. Now, I'm not saying that there are some people who would take advantage of this situation of being, say, stuck in a particular class, but there are some that do this. They will, they'll intentionally hold themselves back in a particular class, maybe picking the smaller clubs to go out and do their tournament shooting at to get their tournament practice, so that when they go to a major match where they award money, they are effectively in a class where they don't belong, and it's payday for them. So you may have somebody who really should be in, say, B class, and they are in D class for one reason or another. So they go to these big shoots and they get enough punches and they get maybe $1,000 or whatever, and then they're in C class, and then they play the game all over again because they're really shooting it at a much higher classification. So they'll go into C class and they'll intentionally pick these smaller clubs where they don't get punches, where they don't advance. They're stuck in C class, holding everybody up behind them. And that, in my opinion, is one problem with the system. To give you an example of this in terms of scores here, I'm going to go through some of my scores for the year, and you can kind of see how this would have worked out and a suggestion that I have of making the system better. So in January of this year, I was in D class because, again, I had declared D in December. I was in D class. I was awarded one punch. I had a score of 82. All right, that's good. At least I got my punch. And there were, in that case, there 1, 2, 3 other shooters in D class. We had just the minimum to award a punch in D class. February, there was one person in D class, me. I had a score of 72. The high score in C class was 77. The high score in B class was 73. The high score in A class was 79. I won't bore you with the rest of the details. So my performance there in that case was pretty poor. Well, I wouldn't say it's poor, but it wasn't great. My proposal, so you'll see how this works, is that if you are in a class where there were not enough shooters for you to punch, but you ended up having a score that was higher than any of the classes that are higher than you, where a punch was awarded in any of those classes, then you should be considered what I'm going to refer to as a virtual member of that class. So what I mean by that is, let's say you are in D class and you end up beating, let's say not the person, and let's say in C class where there were 3 people in that and a punch was awarded, but that score was higher than yours. But say in B class, for whatever reason, there were 3 people in that and that score was lower than yours, then you would be considered a virtual member of that class, that higher class, as if you were there all along to begin with, and then you should also receive a punch as well as the people who are in that class. You'll see how this plays out here in a minute. Okay, so in March, I ended up shooting, there was one person in D class, me. I shot a score of 81, okay. In C class, there were only 2 shooters. Is that right? There were 3 shooters, and the high score there was 84. Okay, so my 81 does not beat an 84. But in B class, where there were 3 shooters, the high score there was 78, where a punch was awarded. So if you made me a virtual member here of B class, I would have received a punch from that particular shoot. Let's go on to the next month. We didn't have a shoot in April or May, so the next month is June. So I had a score of, let's see, 80. I was the only person, again, in D class. In C class, there were 3 shooters. High score was 77. 1 punch was awarded. So in that case there, you would make me a virtual member of C class, and I would have received a punch as well as the person who received their punch in C class. For what it's worth, B class had a high score of 79 and was also received a punch. But again, since I received my virtual punch, I'm not going to receive 2 virtual punches or anything like that. However, that would be an interesting thought. So that's how that would have worked out there. In July I sucked. Just to put it frankly, I was the only shooter in D class. I had a score of 69. C class only had 2 shooters. The high score there was 71. B class had 3 shooters. The high score there was 81. So I would not have achieved enough not achieved a high score enough to receive any virtual punches in any class. And then again, the last shoot here was in August. I declared C class. There were 4 shooters in C class, and I had a high score of 82 and got the single punch there. So you can see here that becoming, or this idea of a virtual member of a class would take somebody who may be intentionally trying to work the system and kind of gently move them along in terms of classification, giving them punches where they may be specifically targeting shoots where they know there may not be enough similar class shooters to get a punch. And in this case here, they would become a virtual member of a higher class which did receive punches and move them along, which would eliminate this idea of trying to hold your classification back. Now, apparently, from what I understand, this is not a new idea, and it's been flown by the NSCA before, and for one reason or another, they refused it. I'm not really exactly sure why, and maybe there's an unintended consequence, and maybe if any of you know the history of this, of why it was refused, or what the unintentional consequence was, I'd love to hear it. So if you know more about that, please send us an email at powerfactorshow@gmail.com, or if you want, go ahead and jump on Facebook at facebook.com/powerfactorshow and post what you know about that. But I honestly don't see any problem with this virtual class system or idea, and I think it would actually solve more problems than what it would create. But apparently the NSCA doesn't feel that way. And it would be interesting to know why or whatever about, why that doesn't work out for them. So at any rate, hope you enjoyed the episode. Hopefully this may have given you a little more insight into how the system works. Again, very similar to USPSA in terms of that they don't require that you become a member of the organization to shoot, and the classification system is very similar in terms of the different rankings. But the way you progress from one class to the other is obviously very different. And the other big difference is that you can go backwards, where in USPSA, you can become a master and then shoot like a C class shooter, and you're still a master unless you petition and get it awarded that you are down class. So again, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.